sleeper car with someone else's name. I found the ticket by accident, the way a secret sometimes offers itself with the arrogance of a stray thread. It was folded inside the paperback my wife had left on the kitchen counter, a romance novel with a woman in a red dress running away from a castle that could have been anywhere. The ticket said, Nightline 117, City Central to Sea Cliff, Private Sleeper, Departure 21:05. She had told me she was going to a client dinner. I ran my thumb across the ink until it warmed under my skin, as if heat could change the data. I work with wood for a living. Most days I sand edges until they confess, coax tight joins, make the kind of tables people swear hold their families together. I believe in things that take the weight you put on them. But the ticket in my palm was a hinge that didn't belong to any door I'd ever built. I told myself a story. She bought it for us, a surprise escape, and then decided to wrap the idea in a lie to make the reveal sharper. Love accepts foolish logic, it kneels for it. Another story arrived, leaner. She had bought it for herself and a man whose name I would learn whether I wanted to or not. I checked the time, 20:12, washed my hands like I could make them honest, grabbed a jacket, and left without turning off the light above the sink. Nightline 117 looks like nostalgia learned to charge admission. The station wore its high iron arches like a tired tiara. I joined the suggestion of a queue and handed over my card to the attendant with the practiced reluctance of a man who wants to be stopped. No one stopped me. Trains forgive things that cars remember. I boarded at the last minute and walked the narrow corridor like a man in a low-budget dream. The sleeper compartments were closed, gold numbers above little sliding doors like polite secrets. At 3C, my card stuttered and then approved me into a room the size of a promise you're not sure you should have made. Inside, two bunks facing each other, a window, a small sink, and a mirror that made the room double without becoming larger. And on the lower bunk, a woman's violin case. She turned from the window with the unstartled calm of someone who hadn't counted on privacy anyway. "Are you Daniel?" she asked. "Evan," I said, because I've never been good at lying without practicing. "There was a mix-up, or I'm the mix-up." She smiled with the kind of mouth that suggests it has known wrong trains that turned out right. "So am I, apparently. The booking desk said there was a cancellation, but the cancellation seems to have canceled its mind." She wore a gray sweater that flirted with being blue when she moved, and the kind of perfume that says it remembers good decisions better than bad ones. She looked like a person who had learned to carry her own luggage in every sense. The train started with a hum that felt like consent, and the city slid backward as if embarrassed to be seen. "I can try to find another compartment," I said without moving. The woman tilted her head and considered me with professional curiosity. "Or we can share. The top bunk is practically a balcony." I should have said no. I should have said many sensible things. "Are you a musician?" I asked instead, nodding at the violin case. "On paper," she said. "Myra." She extended a hand, and when I took it I felt the callus on the side of her finger where a bow has its way with people. "Where are you going, Evan who isn't Daniel?" "Sea Cliff," I said, which was technically true and morally sloppy. "I think my wife is on this train." "You think," she repeated gently, like a nurse testing a bruise with a fingertip. She sat on the lower bunk and angled her knees toward me, a small invitation to decide who I was. "I found a ticket," I said. "She told me she had a dinner. I told myself charming lies and boarded." Myra's eyes were the clever brown of a good espresso. "Do you want to find her, or do you want to find out?" "Both," I said. The word surprised me with how quickly it arrived. She laughed once, almost without sound. Then you need a lookout, she said, and set her violin case aside like an argument she was saving for later. And apparently a roommate. We took turns in the tiny sink. Sharing that kind of proximity is a cheat code for intimacy, though we kept our clothes on and our civility firm. The corridor was busy with late arrangements, people discovering they had packed the wrong toothbrush, the wrong pajamas, the wrong person. I left Myra tuning the air with small scales that barely existed and went a walk the length of the train like a penitent with a very narrow church. Car 5 was all seats and sleeping necks. Car 6 was a dining car pretending to be a living room. I bought a coffee that tasted like the idea of night and stood by the window, letting the landscape write over itself. And then there she was, Hannah. My wife wore the red coat she swears isn't hers and the smile she saves for people who haven't loved her long enough to ask inconvenient questions. Across from her at a table, a man whose hair had decided to be salt and not ask permission. He touched her wrist not like he owned it, but like he assumed no one would object. I could have walked on. I could have made a chapel of my restraint and prayed in it until morning. Instead, I placed my cup on the slim metal ledge and forced the universe to be small enough for me. I stepped into the dining car and took a seat 3 tables away. The waiter glanced at me with professional amnesia and set down a menu as if we'd been together for years. Hannah didn't see me, or she did and decided not to. In marriage, those are identical for a while. The man Daniel, perhaps. I had stolen his room, laughed with his head back and kissed my wife's hand like it was a book he'd read before and still admired. They were careful, the way people are when they believe the world offers them discretion as a reward for audacity. When they left, I followed them down the corridor at a distance that suggested I trusted them. At car 8, they slid into a sleeper with the ease of people entering a reference they shared. The door shuddered, the lock clicked. My heart did the same. Myra met me halfway back with a look that was all question and no panic. I told her in the elevator language of raised eyebrows and tiny shrugs that the world had kept turning. "Do you want a scene?" she asked in our compartment, after I had told the long version with fewer words. "I want a mirror," I said, not sure where I had borrowed that phrase from, only that it fit my mouth. "And oxygen." She studied me like a carpenter studies a stubborn joint, not with contempt but with respect for the work ahead. "Sometimes the kindest thing is to see it all," she said. "I've been the rehearsal for someone else's opening night. It's a terrible job." "You." "Years ago," Myra said. "He was a pianist with a fear of flying and a fondness for flattery. I was both the ground and the applause. When I left, I taught myself to love train schedules. They're honest about departures." We lay on our bunks fully dressed, shoes kicked under, the compartment breathing with the track's iron lullaby. This is the erotic part I can say without saying. The way her foot found the edge of my bunk in the dark, the way my breath adjusted to hers and didn't ask why, the way her laugh, when it came, existed against my throat for a second because the room was small and the night was a conspirator. We spoke in that midnight grammar where everything sounds like either a vow or a sin. "What will you do in the morning?" she asked. "Make coffee without crying in it," I said. "Then leave or stay but not hover." "And now?" "Now I will not be a ghost in my own life." She slid down, the springs sighing in agreement, and sat on the edge of my bunk like a priest who doesn't need you to confess. She touched my cheek with the back of her knuckles. No fireworks, no violins despite the presence of one, just the quiet electrics of being known without being claimed. I turned my face and placed a kiss in the soft shelf below her thumb. A bad man would have asked for more. A good man would have asked for less. I chose the third door, the one labeled "Enough for Tonight." We must have slept, because the train's dawn was new. The window was a moving painting of fog curling away from fields like embarrassed lovers. Myra's sweater had migrated to my shoulder as if it had a crush on me. We made a single cup of coffee from the compartment sachet and passed it back and forth. The cup smelled like paper and the future. At 6:20, I knocked on 8B. The door opened halfway, and my reflection divided neatly between two bodies. Hannah's hair was sleep-tousled in a way I used to think belonged to us. Under the robe, her throat was flushed with the blood that follows certain choices. Daniel wore a t-shirt that made a case for gravity. For 3 seconds, none of us spoke. The train didn't care. It kept its appointed path. "I brought you this," I said, and held out her paperback, the castle, the red dress, because I couldn't bring myself to hand her the ticket I had already used. "You left it at home." Hannah took the book. Her fingers flinched, small, barely visible, but to me it was a flare. "Evan," she said, packing years into my name, "what are you doing here?" "Finishing a sentence," I said, "beginning another." Daniel ran a hand through his hair and arrived at an expression he probably uses when a waiter tells him the special has sold out. "We should talk," he said to his feet. "We will," I said, "in a place that isn't rented by the hour." Hannah's eyes filled, the way eyes do when the body thinks water can extinguish a building. She reached for me, not to touch, but in the way a person reaches for a switch in the dark. "I didn't mean." "You did," I said, not unkindly. "The truth can be soft if you hold it right. You meant it last night, and perhaps for a while before that. Meaning it now would be an insult." We stood in the small theater of a doorway while the world tied its shoelaces. Behind me, someone laughed in another corridor, delighted by a joke that didn't ask anyone to change. I stepped back and let the lock declare itself. Myra was waiting in the dining car with 2 coffees that tasted of absolution. She looked at my face with a musician's ear. "How bad?" she asked. "Human," I said, "which is to say it will leave a mark." We sat by a window and watched the train carve the morning into manageable slices. We didn't touch to reassure each other. We didn't need to. She told me about a competition in Sea Cliff, about a piece she'd been nursing for months that felt like a confession written for a roomful of strangers. I told her about the chair I'd built the year we married, the way Hannah had curled into it with her legs beneath her, and claimed it the way sometimes people should be allowed to be claimed. We allowed Eros into the room gently, through glances that lasted a hair too long, through the shared stirrer, through the way my knee found the metal curve under the table where hers already was. YouTube would forgive us, I hope, for saying we leaned toward each other, for pausing at the edge of a kiss and learning how restraint can be as intimate as surrender. When the train pulled into Sea Cliff, the platform tasted of salt and dozens of plans. Hannah walked past us with her coat closed, a woman who had not slept well. Daniel followed in that way some men have, convinced gravity is a fan. He did not look at me. He didn't have to. We both knew our parts in the play were done for the day. I didn't wave. Some endings require a different ritual. Myra walked with me to the taxi stand. The morning had decided to be bright, whether anyone deserved it or not. She set her violin case on the curb and looked at me like a question she wouldn't pressure me to answer. "I don't collect emergencies," she said, "but I do keep good people." "I don't know which I am," I said. "Then we can find out," she said simply. "Not today if you don't want. Not at all if you don't want. But I'd like to send you a message that isn't a ticket stub." "Coffee," I said, "after your competition, win or lose." "I intend to play like an honest woman," she said with a grin that landed gently on my chest. We didn't kiss. We let the possibility stand between us like a small table set for 2. She slid into a cab with her violin perched like a cat, and I watched the city decide to be itself around her. I rented a room above a bookshop, the kind with a skylight and the smell of paper learning the weather. I called a locksmith for the apartment I would be going back to, not to change the locks yet, but to ask about the price of believing in thresholds. Hannah texted that evening, the long apology a person writes when they're trying to remove their fingerprints from a weapon. I read it twice and answered once. I said I would meet her to divide our estate of photographs and pans and plants. I said she didn't owe me a dramatic confession. I said she should keep the red coat. It was, after all, hers now. On Sunday, I stood in the back of the concert hall in Sea Cliff and watched Myra step into the circle of light with the steadiness of a routine and the hunger of a debut. The first note she drew from the violin didn't ask the room for permission. It gave the room a job. I watched her body translate invisible instructions into sound, watched her mouth soften on a difficult passage, watched her eyes find the back wall as if they could climb it. When it was over, she bowed like a person who believes in low centers of gravity, and the room forgot how to clap in time, and then remembered. After, in the corridor that smelled of resin and dust and the impatience of bouquets, she found me with her chin tipped up and her cheeks bright with the useful kind of exhaustion. I pressed my palm against the small of her back, just there, just once, a punctuation instead of an essay. She leaned into the touch the way a note leans into its neighbor. "Coffee," I said. "Coffee," she agreed, and the word was warm in the mouth. We walked to a cafe where the cups were heavy and the conversation didn't have to be. We sat by the window again, because it's good to keep certain rituals, and stole sips from each other like teenagers borrowing courage. Our hands met across the table, fingers lacing with the ease of a rehearsal that pretends it's the first night. When we kissed, later, under the crooked sign of the bookshop in the certain sky, it was unhurried, careful, like opening a drawer in an old dresser and finding a scarf you forgot you loved. The kiss was a room with good light, a train that arrived on time, a chord that resolves because it wants to. I went home to my shop and started a table with 2 leaves, the kind you can expand for unexpected company. I sanded until my arms remembered the true work of making. Hannah and I divided our life gently, and when I ran my fingers across the empty indentations in the drawer where her ring had slept at night, I didn't cut myself. I mailed her the paperback with the castle on the cover, the ticket stub tucked inside as a bookmark. People should be allowed to keep their narratives, even when the plot is cruel. Sometimes late, I stand by the station and watch the nightline slide in like a dark idea, and I think about the room with 2 bunks and a mirror that doubles your mistakes until you get closer and they become smaller. There is a sleeper car somewhere that remembers my name next to someone else. There is a woman with a violin who plays like honesty might be contagious. There is a man who learned that love is a piece of furniture. You build it, you sit in it, and sometimes when it breaks, you repurpose the wood and make something that will hold you just as well.